Hare Krishna, devotees, welcome to day 57 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, third canto. And we are just now starting chapter 21 of the third canto, which is titled Conversation between Manu and Kardama. So this is interesting. This is the beginning of the story of the appearance of Lord Kapila, actually. Yes, which will go on for a few chapters. Anyway, all right, let us begin with our prayers. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastyachade Shatarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasa Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakapaturubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha, patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Right, so here we go. Bhakti Vaibhava, third canto Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 21, conversation between Manu and Kardama. Right, so let's have a look at the sections here. It's a bigger chapter, it's a big chapter, 56 verses, that's pretty big actually. There are bigger, but that's pretty big. So we've divided it into 5 sections as follows. First of all, from verse 1 to verse 5, Vidura asks about the line of Swayambhuva Manu. Verse 1 to verse 5, Vidura asks about the line of Swayambhuva Manu. Then the second section, verse 6 to verse 12, Maitreya talks about Kardama Muni. From verse 6 to verse 12, Maitreya talks about Kardama Muni. Then third section from verse 13 to verse 21, Kardama asks the Lord for a wife. Okay, anyway, we'll get there, and that's an interesting idea. So advanced, he can speak to the Lord, and he asks him for a wife. Okay, and then section 4, from verse 22 to verse 35, the Lord tells Kardama of Devahuti. Verse 22 to verse 35, the Lord tells Kardama of Devahuti, a very special young lady, daughter of Swayambhuva Manu. Right, and then section 5, the last section, from verse 36 to verse 56. So that's a long section, that's 20 or 21 verses. 36 to 56, Swayambhuva Manu visits Kardama Muni, with Devahuti actually. Right, so here we go, devotees. Verse 1 to verse 5. let's just read the verses to start off with. Verse 1. Vidura said, "The line of Swayambhuva Manu was most esteemed. O worshipful sage, I beg you, give me an account of this race, whose progeny multiplied through sexual intercourse." We've been getting quite a bit about connected in one way or another with sexual intercourse. Verse 2, the two great sons of Swayambhuva Manu, Priyavrata and Uttanapad, ruled the world consisting of 7 islands, just according to religious principles. Verse 3, O holy Brahman, O sinless one, you have spoken of his daughter, known by the name Devahuti, as the wife of the sage Kardama, the Lord of created beings. Okay, well that's interesting. Kardama is referred to as the Lord of created beings. Anyway, it's a bit unusual. Verse 4, how many offspring did that great yogi beget through the princess, who was endowed with 8-fold perfection in the yoga principles? Oh, pray, tell me this, for I am eager to hear it. Verse 5, O holy sage, tell me how the worshipful Ruchi and Daksha, the son of Brahma, generated children after securing as their wives the other 2 daughters of Swayambhuva Manu. That's a sort of, anyway, it's certainly a point of interest, but it's not directly connected with Kardama and Devahuti. Okay, so anyway, let's get into it here. Verse 1, Vidura said, the line of Swayambhuva Manu was most esteemed. O worshipful sage, I beg you, give me an account of this race, whose progeny multiplied through sexual intercourse. So actually the section we've titled Vidura asks about the line of Swayambhuva Manu. It's verse 1 to verse 5. So anyway, there's verse 1, and there's a purport here, and Srila Prabhupada makes the point, regulated sex life for good population is worthwhile. And Prabhupada goes on, and we can understand Vidura's a renunciate. He's not interested in hearing about people who just engaged in sex life and their histories, but he was interested in the progeny, the children, the descendants, the different qualities and different types of persons who then went on to help develop the universe. So particularly in that dynasty from Swayambhuva Manu, there were many good devotee kings who protected their subjects with spiritual knowledge. They were really devotees. So by hearing of the activities of such kings, one becomes enlightened. Prabhupada points out there's an important word in this connection here, parama samata, which in the word for word, let's see, it's in the second line of the actual verse, most esteemed. Yes. So Prabhupada comments, though, in the purport that this term Paramasamhita indicates that the progeny created by Swayambhuva Manu and his sons was approved of by great authorities. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, in other words, sex life for creating exemplary population is acceptable to all sages and authorities of Vedic scripture. And we already mentioned a while ago, a couple of times, how in Bhagavad Gita Krishna says that that type of sex life is a form of himself. Kamosmi. Kama means sex life. Asmi means that I am that form of sex life for creating exemplary Krishna conscious population. Okay, and we go on to verse 2. The two great sons of Swayambhuva Manu, Priyavrata and Uttanapad, ruled the world consisting of 7 islands, just according to religious principles. So Prabhupada makes the point at the beginning of the purport that Srimad Bhagavatam, what is the Srimad Bhagavatam? Well, I mean, it's the message of the Lord, but it includes the history of the great rulers of different parts of the universe. Yes. So, Priyavrata, Swayambhuva Manu is one of those greatest rulers, and his sons Priyavrata and Uttanapad, they're also amongst those greatest rulers of different parts of the universe. And what they did, they ruled the earth, which is divided into 7 islands. And Prabhupada makes the point that these 7 islands are still there, more or less, or basically. They are Asia, Prabhupada says Asia, Europe, Africa, America, Australia, and New Zealand. Krishna. And the North and South Poles. Prabhupada makes the point, there's not exactly a chronological history of the kings of India in the Bhagavatam, but the deeds of the most important kings, such as Priyavrata and Uttanapad, and others like Lord Ram, Maharaj Yudhisthira, they have been recorded because they're worth hearing, and people are benefited by hearing such histories. Verse 3, O holy Brahman, O sinless one, you have spoken of his daughter, known by the name Devahuti, as the wife of the sage Kardama, the Lord of created beings. There's a purport here, shortish, quite short. So here, Prabhupada makes the point, here we're speaking of Swayambhuva Manu, but in Bhagavad Gita we hear of Vaivasvata Manu, and this current age we're in now is the age of Vaivasvata Manu. Swayambhuva Manu was before. Vaivasvata Manu, is it mentioned here? It's not actually mentioned here specifically, but as I recall, Vaivasvata is the 7th Manu in this day of Brahma, because there are 14 in one day of Brahma. Swayambhuva Manu was the first one, and Vaivasvata is, as I recall, the 7th. It means right in the middle of the day of Lord Brahma. In fact, even we are told, Prabhupada said, that now is Lord Brahma's now is Lord Brahma's lunchtime, because there are 14 manus in his 12 hours from early morning to night, to the beginning of the night. So the 7th of 14 is right in the middle, more or less. So that's what we heard Prabhupada said, it's Brahma's lunchtime. So, okay, so, yeah, Vaivasvata Manu is now, Swayambhuva was the first of the 14. Vaivasvata, as we recall, is the 7th Manu. And Swayambhuva, his history begins from the time of the appearance of Lord Varaha. Prabhupada makes the point there are 14 Manus in one day in the life of Brahma, and in the life of each Manu there are particular incidents. Yes, different things happen. Oh yes, so many different things happen. Actually, it's quite amazing. So, like in this Vaivasvata Manu, his time, at this point, Krishna appears. Krishna appears. And that's, that's a major happening. All right, anyway. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying there are 14 Manus in one day of the life of Brahma, and in the life of each Manu there are particular incidents. The Vaivasvata Manu of Bhagavad Gita is different from Swayambhuva Manu. Okay, so on we go, verse 4. So, questions continue. How many offspring did that great yogi beget through the princess who was endowed with eightfold perfection in the yoga principles? Oh, pray, tell me this, for I'm eager to hear it. Right, so there's a fairly substantial purport here. Here Vidura is inquiring about Kardama and Devahuti and their children, and it's described here as we read, she was very advanced, Devahuti, very advanced in Ashtanga Yoga, the eightfold yoga. And Prabhupada lists out the 8 parts of the eightfold yoga, Ashtanga. Ashta means 8. Ashtanga, 8 limbs or 8 parts of that particular form of yoga. And he just gives the English. Prabhupada just gives the English. We'll also give the Sanskrit. So first is control of the senses. That's called yama. Then next is second, strict following of the rules and regulations. That's niyama. Then third is practice of the different sitting postures. That's asana. Then fourth is control of the breath. That's pranayam. And then the fifth is withdrawing the senses from sense objects, pratyahara. And sixth is concentration of the mind. So that stage is called dharana. Then seventh is meditation, dhyana, and the 8th is self-realization, samadhi. Samadhi, yes. So, like this, there's the 8. And so after becoming advanced in that, There are 8 further perfectional stages called the Yoga Siddhis, means the 8 different mystical perfections. So anyway, both Karadama and Devahuti were advanced in yoga practice. Prabhupada says that Karadama was a Mahayogi, a really great mystic, and Devahuti, his wife, anyway, she's going to become his wife, was a Yoga Lakshana, not on the same level, but still very advanced. Yoga Lakshana means one advanced in yoga. So previously, after becoming perfect sages, after becoming perfect sages and saintly people, after becoming perfect, let's put in a comma there. After becoming perfect, sages and saints used to beget children. Until they became perfect, they followed celibacy. So brahmacharya is a very important thing. It's not just, sometimes in our temples, sometimes devotees think that the brahmacharis are just, the boys who are too young to be married yet, or just the boys who can't get married. Somehow or other, no one wants to marry them. But actually, brahmacharya is extremely important in spiritual life. Brahma acharya, those whose activities are spiritual, Brahma acharya, following the rules and regulations of celibacy. So brahmacharya is required, actually, for self-realization and mystical powers. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, there's no recommendation in the Vedic scriptures that one can go on enjoying material sense gratification at one's whims, as one likes, and at the same time become a great meditator by paying a rascal some money. Prabhupada, Krishna, Krishna. No, Prabhupada just gets so much into these things. Sometimes it's just amazingly powerful, really extremely powerful. But we go on now to verse 5. O holy sage, tell me how the worshipful Ruchi and Daksha, the son of Brahma, generated children after securing as their wives the other 2 daughters of Swayambhuva Manu. So that's that's a bit of a different subject, but it's going to be coming up. It's coming up. Ruchi was Daksha, anyway, we've read of Daksha, but Ruchi was very important. And Daksha was very important in his own way. Okay, so there's a purport here. Prabhupada says all the great personalities who increased the population at the beginning of creation, they're all called Prajapatis. Brahma is like the original Prajapati, Prajapati Pati, the father of all Prajapatis. But Swayambhuva Manu, who's a son of Brahma, is also known as Prajapati. And Daksha is also known as Prajapati. And Daksha, who's a son of Brahma also. So Swayambhuva had 2 daughters, Akuti and Prasuti. Ruchi married Akuti, Daksha married Prasuti, and Daksha and Prasuti gave birth to Sati, but that's another story. That's coming up in the 4th canto. That's quite a story. So these couples and their children produced immense numbers of children to populate the universe, not the usual 2, 3, 4. 1 is quite normal, 1 child. 2 is normal. 3 is normal. 4, that's quite a few children. 5, that's quite a number. More than that, you're talking about plenty of children. But here we're talking about thousands. So Vidura's inquiry was, how did they beget the population in the beginning? Right. So on we go, devotees. That's the first section. And we go now to the second section. Maitreya talks about Kardama Muni from verse 6 to verse 12. We'll read the verses. Verse 6, the great sage Maitreya replied, commanded by Lord Brahma to beget children in the worlds, the worshipful Kardama Muni practiced penance on the bank of the river Saraswati for a period of 10,000 years. Verse 7, during that period of penance, the sage Kardama, by worship through devotional service in trance, propitiated the personality of Godhead, who is the quick bestower of all blessings upon those who flee to him for protection. Verse 8, then in the Satya Yuga, the lotus-eyed Supreme Personality of Godhead, being pleased, showed himself to that Kardama Muni and displayed his transcendental form, which can be understood only through the Vedas. Verse 9, Kardama Muni saw the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is free from material contamination in his eternal form, effulgent like the sun, wearing a garland of white lotuses and water lilies. The Lord was clad in spotless yellow silk, and his lotus face was fringed with slick, dark locks of curly hair. 10. Adorned with a crown and earrings, he held his characteristic conch, disc, and mace in 3 of his hands, and a white lily in the 4th. He glanced about in a happy, smiling mood, whose sight captivates the hearts of all devotees. 12. A golden streak on his chest, the famous Kaustubha gem suspended from his neck. He stood in the air with his lotus feet placed on the shoulders of Garuda. 12. When Kardama Muni actually realized the Supreme Personality of Godhead in person, he was greatly satisfied because his transcendental desire was fulfilled. He fell on the ground with his head bowed to offer obeisances unto the lotus feet of the Lord. His heart naturally full of love of God, with folded hands, he satisfied the Lord with prayers. So there you go, devotees. Those are the verses from the second section. Maitreya talks about Kardama Muni from verse 6 to verse 12. So verse 6, the great sage Maitreya replied, commanded by Lord Brahma to beget children in the worlds, the worshipful Kardama Muni practiced penance on the bank of the river Saraswati for a period of 10,000 years, devotees. So he meditated. So let's look at the purport here. Verse 6. He meditated in yoga for 10,000 years before attaining perfection. And Prabhupada mentions that Valmiki practice yoga meditation for 60,000 years. So that sort of yoga practice can be performed by people with long durations of life. Otherwise, you can't do that system of yoga. It's just beyond the capacity of the ordinary human being of this age. I mean, totally beyond, completely. There's just no question. So Srila Prabhupada says, following the regulations, controlling the senses, and practicing the different sitting postures are merely the preliminary practices. So Prabhupada says, and it's an interesting point, isn't it? We don't know how people can be fooled by bogus yoga systems. It's just so stupid that how can it happen? It's ridiculous to be fooled by a bogus yoga system which tells us we can meditate for 15 minutes a day and become one with God. It's just so absurd. But it's Kali Yuga. Kali Yuga is the age of bluffing and quarrel. And there's no possibility of attaining yoga perfection in these ways, or hardly making even any progress at all. What to speak of attaining perfection? So Prabhupada points out that the Vedic literatures clearly state 3 times that in Kali Yuga there's no alternative to chanting the holy names. And Prabhupada quotes that famous verse, Harinam, Harinam, Harinam eva kevalam, Kalo nasyeva, nasyeva, nasyeva. No other way, no other way, no other way. Gatir anyata, to achieve the perfection. So on we go to verse 7. During that period of penance, the sage Kaudama, by worship through devotional service in trance, propitiated the personality of Godhead, who is the quick bestower of all blessings upon those who flee to him for protection. All right, so there's quite a major purport here. Let's go through it. So Kaudama, he did mystic yoga 10,000 years. I mean, this is all about this. Prabhupada says this is all about the significance of meditation. So the verse says he did his practice by worship through devotional service. So Prabhupada makes the point that whether you do yoga or you speculate and do research to find God, whatever you do has to be mixed with devotional service. The target of perfection and realization is the Lord. And of course, at the end of the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, it said that one who constantly engages in Krishna consciousness, the devotee is the topmost yogi. And on top of that, the Lord fulfills the desires of his devotees, his surrendered devotees. So therefore one has to surrender to the Lord in order to achieve real success. So Prabhupada makes the point that devotional service is the direct method, other methods are indirect. In Kali Yuga, the direct method is the most feasible because it's Kali Yuga. Life is difficult, extremely difficult. People are short-lived, not intelligent, they're very disturbed, poverty-stricken. Yeah. So therefore, Lord Chaitanya, the most merciful incarnation of the Supreme Lord, has given the greatest boon. Just chant the holy names, and you become perfect. So then, second paragraph, Prabhupada says the words Samprapede Harim mean that in various ways Kardama satisfied the Lord by his devotional service. And also in the verse, the words Kriya Yogena indicate devotional service. Yogena, that ena ending means by Kriya Yoga or devotional service. So Kardama, he meditated, but he also did devotional service. Yes. And so we have to act in devotional service by hearing and chanting, etc. Remembering, Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam, that remembering is also meditation. And we must hear about his activities, we must chant his glories. So after doing all these things for 10,000 years, Kardama achieved perfection of meditation. But this, you can't do this in Kali Yuga. How about for 10,000 years, Who would be successful? If you've got to do it for 10,000 years, otherwise you won't achieve perfection. So who's going to do it? Obviously. Too obviously. Absolutely nobody. But nowadays, there's so many people who are just so foolish. They're looking for some shortcut, easy way. Means they want to be cheated. So Krishna sends great cheaters who mislead them, and their lives become useless, and they're doomed. So in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 16, verse 17, yes, it is stated that rascals of self-made authority do yoga. Let me just read the whole thing here. In Bhagavad Gita, it's clearly stated, chapter 16, verse 17, that yet rascals of self-made authority, being puffed up by illegally collected money, perform yoga without following the authoritative books. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, they're very proud of the money they've plundered from innocent persons who wanted to be cheated. Oh, Krishna, what can you say? That's just so powerful. Verse 8. Then in the Satya Yuga, the lotus-eyed Supreme Personality of Godhead, being pleased, showed himself to that Kardama Muni and displayed his transcendental form, which can be understood only through the Vedas. And no, you can't understand the Lord's form by reading anything other than Vedic literatures. Right, so Srila Prabhupada says here there are two very significant points. First was Kardama achieved success in yoga practice in the beginning of Satya Yuga, when people lived not just 10,000 years, but 100,000 years. That's point number one. And point number two was that Kardama Muni attained success, and the Lord became pleased with him. And when the Lord was pleased with him, he showed him his form. So Prabhupada goes on to talk about the impersonalists. They say you can arbitrarily concentrate your mind on any form you imagine. Krishna, or which, makes you feel good. But here it's clearly, very clearly said that the form which the Lord showed Kardama Muni by his divine grace is described in the Vedic literatures. So it wasn't an imaginary form. He saw the eternal, transcendental form of the Lord. Verse 9. Kardama Muni saw the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is free from material contamination, in his eternal form, effulgent like the sun, wearing a garland of white lotuses and water lilies. The Lord was clad in spotless yellow silk, and his lotus face was fringed with slick, dark locks of curly hair. 10. Adorned with a crown and earrings, he held his characteristic conch, disc, and mace in 3 of his hands, and a white lily in the 4th. He glanced about in a happy, smiling mood, whose sight captivates the hearts of all devotees. So there's no purport to either 10, 9, or 10. We go on to verse 11. A golden streak on his chest, the famous Kaustubha gem suspended from his neck. He stood in the air with his lotus feet placed on the shoulders of Garuda. Right, okay. So this is verse 11, and Prabhupada makes the point in the beginning of the purport that the descriptions in these verses we've just read now, 9, 10, and 11, of the transcendental form of the Lord, they're from authoritative scriptures and not the imagination of Kardama Muni. Yeah, and the decorations the Lord had were beyond material conceptions. And even Shankaracharya admitted that Narayan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, has nothing to do with the material creation. So this is all confirmed in Scripture. It's all confirmed. The appearance of the Lord, his body, form, dress, instructions, his words, the jewelry that he was wearing. None of these descriptions are manufactured from just material imagination. They're all confirmed in the Vedic literatures. So through his performance of yoga, he saw the Lord as he is. And, after doing yoga for 10,000 years, there's no point in seeing some imagined, unreal form. So, but anyway, the process of Krishna consciousness. So, but the thing is that perfection of yoga when you reach perfection, it's not voidness or impersonalism, but rather the perfection is when you see the Lord. And the process of Krishna consciousness delivers the form of the Lord directly. Brahma Samhita describes his form his abode made of Chintamani gems, and how the Lord is there as a cowherd boy served by many thousands of gopis. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, these descriptions are authoritative, and a Krishna-conscious person takes them directly, acts on them, preaches them, and practices devotional service as enjoined in the authoritative scriptures. So we go on to verse 12. When Kardama Muni actually realized the Supreme Personality of Godhead in person, He was greatly satisfied because his transcendental desire was fulfilled. He fell on the ground with his head bowed to offer obeisances unto the lotus feet of the Lord. His heart, naturally full of love of God, with folded hands, he satisfied the Lord with prayers. So there is a big purport here. 3 big paragraphs. But let's go through. Let's go through. So, Prabhupada explains, realizing the personal form of the Lord is the highest perfectional stage of yoga. 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita describes that. Yoginam api sarvesham. That's the last verse of the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And if you're just going to do Ashtanga Yoga, if that's what you're going to do, sitting postures, other regulations, and then you finally come to the level of samadhi, as we mentioned, then you can see the Lord as Paramatma. Yes, as Paramatma. Of course, it's different from the realization of the devotees when they finally meet the Lord and they speak to the Lord and have pastimes with the Lord. Paramatma is not like that. So this samadhi, Prabhupada gets into a whole thing here. Samadhi is described in the books of Patanjali, who is the big Ashtanga Yoga authority. And he said that samadhi is transcendental pleasure. And Prabhupada makes the point that Patanjali's yoga system is authoritative. Yeah, it's Ashtanga Yoga. It's not exactly devotional service Bhakti Yoga. But as far as it goes, it's authoritative. Whereas the modern so-called yogas, they're just manufactured. And Prabhupada says they're simply ludicrous. I mean, that's such a strong term. Ludicrous basically means they're crazy, absurd. So anyway, yes, so Patanjali's yoga system is Ashtanga Yoga, but the impersonalists come and pollute it, get into some sort of impersonal interpretation. So, but Patanjali says that the soul becomes transcendently pleased when he meets the super soul and sees the super soul. So this contradicts the idea of the impersonalists, of just merging, monism. So therefore some impersonal followers of Patanjali twist his teachings in their own way and pollute the system. These things happen. So now in the next paragraph, second, there are three, and we're going to go through them all right now. So Patanjali says that when you become free of material desires, you achieve your real transcendental situation, and this stage is called spiritual power. The materialists, of course, they have 4 interests: dharma, artha, kama, moksha. To be religious, to be economically developed, to gratify the senses, and then moksha, liberation, to become one. Yes, so according to the monists, when the yogi becomes one, that's called kaivalya. But actually, realizing the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that's real kaivalya. Or in the language of Patanjali, the realization of spiritual power. And he says that when you're free from material desires, you get fixed in realization of the self and the supersoul. That is Chit Shakti. It's interesting. So in spiritual realization, there's perception of spiritual happiness, of course. And in Bhagavad Gita, that's described as the supreme happiness beyond the material senses. And Prabhupada describes that trance, there are two types of trance, sampragyapta and asampragyapta, mental speculation, self-realization. In samadhi or asampragyata, one can realize by the spiritual senses the form of the Lord. That's the ultimate goal of spiritual realization. But now let us just quickly go through this third paragraph. So Patanjali again says that when you're fixed in constant realization of the form of the Lord, that's the perfectional stage, as attained by Kardama Muni. And unless you attain this stage, you've not achieved any ultimate realization. So then there's the 8 mystical perfections in Ashtanga, becoming lighter than the lightest, greater than the greatest, getting whatever you want, etc. There's 8 of them, but that is not perfection. Kardama saw the Lord in his eternal form, not just the super soul, but he met the Lord in person. So Prabhupada explains, devotional service begins with the relationship of the soul to the super soul, or to Krishna, and with Krishna's devotees. And when you attain it, you can't fall down. And if through that yoga system you want to see the Lord, but you become attracted by some material power, mystical power, then you get detoured. Then you don't go any further. You stop there. So, but material enjoyment, as encouraged by the bogus yogis, has nothing to do with transcendental realization. So the real devotees of Bhakti Yoga, they only accept the basic necessities of life, and they refrain completely from sense gratification. Prabhupada concludes the purport and the section by saying that the real devotees, Bhakti yogis, they're prepared to undergo all kinds of tribulation, provided they can make progress in the realization of the personality of Godhead. Okay, so the next section, third section, is from verse 13 to 21. We've got a few minutes. Let's just read the verses. So here we go. 13. The great sage Kardama said, O Supreme Worshipful Lord, my power of sight is now fulfilled, having attained the greatest perfection of the sight of you, who are the reservoir of all existences. Through many successive births of deep meditation, advanced yogis aspire to see your transcendental form. 14. Your lotus feet are the true vessel to take one across the ocean of mundane nescience. Only persons deprived of their intelligence by the spell of the deluding energy will worship those feet with a view to attain the trivial and momentary pleasures of the senses, which even persons rotting in hell can attain. However, O my Lord, you are so kind that you bestow mercy even upon them. Verse 15. Therefore, desiring to marry a girl of like disposition, who may prove to be a veritable cow of plenty in my married life, to satisfy my lustful desire, I too have sought the shelter of your lotus feet, which are the source of everything. for you are like a desire tree. 16. O my Lord, you are the master and leader of all living entities. Under your direction, all conditioned souls, as if bound by rope, are constantly engaged in satisfying their desires. Following them, O embodiment of religion, I also bear oblations for you, who are eternal time. 17. However, persons who have given up stereotyped worldly affairs and the beastly followers of these affairs, and who have taken shelter of the umbrella of your lotus feet by drinking the intoxicating nectar of your qualities and activities in discussions with one another, can be freed from the primary necessities of the material body. 18. Your wheel, which has 3 naves, rotates around the axis of the imperishable Brahman. It has 13 spokes, 360 joints, 6 rims, and numberless leaves carved upon it. Though its revolution cuts short the lifespan of the entire creation, this wheel of tremendous velocity cannot touch the lifespan of the devotees of the Lord. 19. My dear Lord, you alone create the universes. O personality of Godhead, desiring to create these universes, you create them, maintain them, and again wind them up by your own energies, which are under the control of your second energy, called Yoga Maya, just as a spider creates a cobweb by its own energy, and again winds it up. Verse 20. My dear Lord, although it is not your desire, you manifest this creation of gross and subtle elements just for our sensual satisfaction. Let your causeless mercy be upon us, for you have appeared before us in your eternal form, adorned with a splendid wreath of tulsi leaves. Verse 21. I continuously offer my respectful obeisances unto your lotus feet, of which it is worthy to take shelter, because you shower all benedictions on the insignificant. To give all living entities detachment from fruit of activity by realizing you have expanded these material worlds by your own energy. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.